They've been making headlines all week, and tonight they're here to tell us why they want to take back the city. They've been making headlines all week, and tonight they're here to tell us why they want to take back the city. Meet Ireland's housing protesters fighting for change. Orla Tinsley's story of life after a transplant has just been shown on RTE. Tonight, we meet people whose lives have been utterly changed by organ donation, and we'll show you how you can be a donor too. And have you changed your accent to get ahead? Well, we're asking whether how you talk matters. All that and much more. Welcome to Byrne Live. You're very welcome to the programme. The housing crisis is at boiling point. The group at the eye of the storm, who were at the centre of last week's eviction in Dublin city centre, are called Take Back the City. They've pledged to train up volunteers on how to occupy vacant buildings across the country. We have them here tonight. We're going to talk to them in a minute. But first of all, I want to come to you, Councillor Paddy Smith, because you believe this group are anarchists. Is that right?
Well, they're disobeying court orders. They're taking possession of property that isn't theirs. And effectively, if we don't have property rights, if we don't have ownership rights in this country, we do have anarchy. So, yes.
But do you understand that people are frustrated, they're fed up, they're sick of being told to wait, it'll all be fine in a few years' time?
And I would share that frustration. Everybody around this table, everybody in this studio wants the same thing. We want the thousands of people who are currently homeless. We want to be able to give them somewhere to call home. How we do that is by bringing housing stock back into use, by building new houses. I would argue that...
But your party has been in government for how many years now?
Since 2011.
Right, and so here we are,
well,
7 years down the line, and we're still being told to wait.
I would argue that let's say, Dublin City Council spending years in court CPOing old Georgian buildings, and then another few years and a lot of money renovating and bringing them up to spec. That is not a very efficient way of getting people housed. We could CPO every vacant Georgian house in the city tomorrow, and it would still be years before a single person would be housed. So this is a distraction.
Other councils are CPOing successfully. Louth CPO'd 60 properties, for example. So what's the problem with Dublin City Council doing it successfully?
Well, it's a lot easier to buy houses with a willing vendor. So, you know, we are bringing more houses into stock. More social houses have been built than last year. More social houses will be built next year. The trend is very much on an upward trajectory. So people want to say, well, look, you know, what the people are doing here is highlighting the fact that we have a housing crisis. There isn't a single person in this country that isn't aware of the fact that we have a massive housing crisis.
So, Aisling,
all they have achieved is they've wasted Garda resources.
OK, so you're wasting Garda resources, Aisling, and we all know there's a housing crisis, so you're not really highlighting anything that we don't know about. That's what he says.
I think with regards to, I suppose, the movement, like it is an umbrella group or an umbrella network, there is 18 groups involved. The direct action that we're seeing in the media of the occupations, it is just one action. There are all of the 18 groups, I suppose, do other actions that don't get as much publicity, that don't get as much media. Things like support groups, to have a consistent space for tenants, to have a consistent space for people in emergency accommodation and council houses to actually check in if they're having issues, that there is somebody there.
OK, but the headlines are all about what happened last week and the occupations, and he says you're just breaking the law and wasting Garda time. What do you say to that?
It ties into, I suppose, when we have a number of vacant properties all across, like nationally, and we need to divide like how we see ownership of private properties. So on one hand, we have private properties that is for personal use, for family homes, and that's okay. That's not what we're targeting. What we're targeting here is vacant homes, vacant properties that have been empty for a number of years, that have been sat on, that are zoned for residential use and are completely empty, while we have like a symbolic homeless person outside with a sleeping bag, and that's the image. You have somebody sleeping outside
What's
house.
the ultimate objective for you in occupying those vacant properties?
With regards to the occupations, each occupation has a very specific set of demands. So when we talk about when the property is occupied, the 3 demands are: one, that the council compulsory purchase order that vacant property.
He says it doesn't work, it takes years.
I think with regards to how we look at CPOs, when we look at the amount of mortgages that have been repossessed, why can't the council come in at that point? Why does it have to take essentially people either losing their homes or an owner sitting on a vacant property for 3-4 years? So that would be one demand, is the CPO, and then the second demand is that we are calling for public land for public housing to be built on public land, and public land remain in our ownership.
Is that not what we're seeing, though, happening with the Land Development Agency, the announcement made last week, that is going to happen, that all we have to do is wait?
We'd question whether or not the Land Development Agency is NAMA, just guised under more fancy words. It's not necessarily focusing on property. It's now NAMA redressed as land.
OK, well, Deputy Breed Smith is sitting beside you there. I mean, where do you draw the line here, or do you draw a line between protest and breaking the law?
Well, I think we have to ask ourselves, where do they draw the line? Because there are thousands of properties being hoarded by landlords. And Paddy said something very interesting when he talked about the willing vendor. It's easier to CPO when you've got a willing vendor. So clearly the vendors, in the case of Dublin City, are not willing. And they're not willing because they're hoarding. And they're hoarding to drive up the prices. And all of this feeds into a real violent human crisis of homelessness. It's violent on the families, it's violent on the children. And where do you draw the line between breaking the law and treating the most vulnerable in our society in this way? And I think that we have to say hats off to these young people for highlighting this issue. We'd be giving out about young people if they were just hanging out of their phone all day or staying in the bar in UCD half the night. We have to be very proud of what they're doing, because they're taking a principled ideological stand and putting it up to the government to say that private property is not sacred when it becomes a method of making more and more profit, and when it challenges the overall good of society. And that's written into our constitution.
Okay.
Private property cannot usurp the common good.
Carl Dieter, are you proud of these young people and what they're doing?
I'm proud that they feel concerned. I think that protesting is a good thing. Do I think breaking into a place being your method of solving things? No, it seems a bit weird. I would also continue what Breed had mentioned about the Constitution. It's great that you mentioned that, because you see, Irish people were dispossessed of their land. That's why property rights are there, so that you can't just go in and take it away. But you have to continue on to the second part of Article 43, which is what I believe you're quoting, where it says it will be done by the state in accordance with the law. These people are not the state. They're actually not in accordance with the law.
What do you do, Paddy,
so it's
when
a
the state is
contradiction.
failing everybody, and particularly people who are homeless, families sleeping in Garda stations, children being thrown to the four winds? What do you do when the state fails? And clearly the state is failing.
You're making an emotive argument.
I'm
talking about the Constitution.
I'm making a logical argument.
Right, we're not talking about the same thing.
What do young people, what do the rest
You started
of us
speaking
do when
about
the
the
state fails
Constitution.
us?
I'm trying to continue that conversation. And what I'm saying is a contradictory points. The Constitution does protect property rights. It does actually allow the state to take a role where it can take things back. But it is within the law and by the state. If you want to see compulsory purchase, talk to your counsellor. You don't just go in and break into places.
He's against it. Your
But the whole
counsellor
thing
is against it.
there's this idea that you can just have, everyone can have free housing if only we did X. And that's compelling. And when people say that...
That is so insulting. There is no such thing as free housing. People pay rent. And this idea that public housing and social housing is free, it is so insulting. I grew up in a social house. My family paid rent all my life. There's nothing free about it.
It's being peddled that there's some great solution out there. And this is a thing, you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach him to fish and he's going to vote for the person who gave him free fish. And
so
that's
everybody
all the
should go out and build their own home? Is that what you're trying to say?
I'm not saying anything, really.
Can I ask you about something that Aisling mentioned, and Breed as well, about hoarding? So people buy these properties at rock-bottom prices, and it doesn't pay them to do them up in order to rent them out. So they hold on to them. If prices are rising, they hold on to them until they can sell them at the greatest profit.
I totally disagree with hoarding, but you know who the worst hoarder is? The state. The biggest hoarder of land, the state. The biggest hoarder of empty buildings in Dublin, also the state.
So do you blame people for protesting in this way if that is the case?
As you
Well,
pointed,
they went
pointed
into a
out the
commercial
state of the
building. Like,
solution.
if Owen Murphy woke up tomorrow and said, I'm going to solve homelessness by putting you into similar buildings, there'd be an outcry of how inappropriate it was. If the place burned down, everyone would blame the person who owned that property for what a disgraceful thing had happened. You've got to have places that are actually homes. Why don't we go, or you guys go, or somebody go, and take the hundreds of empty council houses that are out there and the hundreds of empty
That's
council
been done,
flats?
and we're
Yeah, but you're
doing
not.
it.
You're taking back commercial buildings on Frederick
Okay,
Street
Ashley,
to make
come
as
on.
much chaos as possible.
The thing is, there's like, it's both happen simultaneously, and what's getting the most media is the private occupations at the moment.
So you're interested in media, not about a solution?
No, it's not. It's not about being interested in media. It's very, it's quite strategic. Our first occupation, and indeed the second occupation, had very grey. I suppose, like there was not necessarily a solid, conclusive owner down as a home as the registered owner.
So
And
how
what
many
we
state
have,
properties
what
have
we
you
have in
taken?
Ireland, essentially, you don't have to register your property for 2 years. So what we have in Ireland is owners of properties bouncing properties from family member to family member, friend to friend, and on paper that looks like that property has sold, when in reality it hasn't sold, and they're trying to hide the home ownership. So when an occupation is happening, if that owner wants us out, it's quite strategic in the sense that they're going to have to put themselves down as the person who is the owner in order to take it to court.
How many state properties have you taken?
So far, this is our third occupation.
Okay, how many state-owned properties have you taken?
State-owned properties, like from the point of me.
Out of the three, how many are state-owned?
There is individual groups within Take Back the City. Take Back the City so far has supported 2 emergency accommodation occupations and council occupations. With regards to DCHA and North Dublin Bay, they have you're talking upwards of 20 evictions, basically just on council houses.
Okay, let's have a look at a poll that we did today. We asked 1,000 adults on our Morg smartphone panel the following question: do you support the Take Back the City group in their illegal occupation of vacant buildings? Let's have a look at the results. 37% do support you, Aisling, and the Take Back the City group. 45% say no, 18% don't know. Now, Paddy, 37% is a fairly sizable amount of people. That's a cross-section of voters.
And it's a reflection of the frustration that you mentioned earlier on. And I've no doubt that the protesters, or at least most of them, they're heartfelt and they're doing this for the right motivation. Okay, we are in unprecedented times. We have a massive crisis, and clearly we need to muster the resources of the state to solve this problem. But it is not for the lack of wanting to do so. It's not for the lack of the people in the housing department, not pulling the right levers and not turning the right knobs. Okay, it takes time to get a construction industry which is completely decimated during the downturn.
It's about pushing the whole agenda for housing into the private developers and the private builders. Because even if you look at the latest initiative that Owen Murphy announced, and you asked Aisling the question earlier on, actually, on principle, it looks great, but when you break it down, 60% of public lands will go to private developers to sell private homes.
Agreed.
And
the
this
councils
is
no
the
longer
problem.
have the ability to build.
I'm not saying about build. You can use private builders, but you build public housing and affordable housing on public lands. Today, NAMA have put up John Player site for sale. That is a site that we, the people, bailed out when the crisis hit, because we set up NAMA to bail out these developers. And it is up for private sale, instead of it being taken over for public and affordable housing. Okay, it's a huge site off the south side.
I want to bring in some members of
It's disgraceful.
Where's Aaron Nolan? Raise your hand there, Aaron. Hi, Aaron. You're with Take Back the City as well, is that right?
Yeah, indeed, yeah.
Do you hear what Paddy is saying? That, look, it's a noble aim, but actually you're not going to achieve anything, and we're doing what we can. It will happen in time.
I think that the direct action that we're taking, I think there's value in taking direct action. You can see throughout history that sometimes there's laws and places that people just have to challenge. Usually most social change of relevance has come from people from the bottom up challenging laws and power structures. I think in the case of Take Back the City, we wouldn't be here talking about this issue in the manner that we are if we hadn't taken the direct action that we have taken. And I think what we're trying to do is to open up a national debate and spark a kind of national movement of these kind of occupations and actions.
OK, Aaron, we have Joe Doyle here as well. Joe, you just raise your hand there. We'll get the microphone to you. You're from the Residential Landlords Association.
Yes.
How do you feel about Take Back the City?
I think these people, and look, if I can start off by saying, like, I come from a social housing background. You know, all my friends, family are still in it, so I see what you're doing there, but I just think you are taking action, which is great, but I just think it's the wrong way to do it altogether.
What's wrong about it?
Well, they're occupying private property. You know, like, anytime I see something like this going on, I just see divisiveness. But this problem's not going to be solved by this divisiveness. I think this man just came up with a great point there. Why aren't you occupying the state-owned property, you know? We're just seeing a statistic there, there's 37% of the people support you. I guarantee you that would at least double if you decided not to go near any more private property and made it publicly known and went after the state-owned property, you know, to a point where
But Joe, can you see the frustration when people see perfectly good houses in the city centre, vacant for years and years and years, and people sleeping on the streets, students unable to get
100%.
accommodation, young professionals unable to get accommodation? People are fed up.
But is it not for people on this side of the table in government to do something to ensure that properties aren't unnecessarily left vacant for extended periods of time?
That's the point of the protest.
And Joe, in fairness,
Of course, but you can't.
But Joe,
Where do we draw the line?
in fairness,
where do we draw the line?
in fairness though, Take Back the City is actually supporting at present a family out in Coolock, and at the moment they're occupying a council building. Like, where is the media on that? Like, we're trying to push media and they're not biting. Do you know what I mean? These actions are being done.
You have your
but
attention now.
unfortunately, it's the private rented that is getting all the traction. Now, for us, we're supporting all occupations, and we're asking people who are like on the waiting list, who are waiting years, who are in private rented. Like, we're calling out to everybody: go forth and occupy. Like, if the government won't supply, we'll occupy.
OK, we have Norma Burke here. People will perhaps know you as Bunty Twuntington MacFuff. I hope I'm getting that right. You went into Dublin City Council and sought a nomination to be president. But you were at the protest last Wednesday, the Take Back the City protest. Why?
I was. And by the way, Claire, a bit cheeky to wear Bunty's pink tonight, I must
know,
say.
we're twins tonight.
Well, firstly, my protest in Dublin City Council was essentially a speech and a plea against the neoliberal narrative of government and the ideological stranglehold it has on this country. And what these people are protesting is a symptom of that. We live in a free market economy, and the role of government in a free market economy is to temper the free market, one, where it's inefficient, and two, where it fails to provide at a basic level for citizens. So, for example, natural monopolies should not be run by the free market because it's inefficient. So the state should own them. So what does the Fine Gael government do? They put buses, which is a natural monopoly, into the private sector, which is actually bad economics. And the same with housing. It's badly managed. They're wasting huge amounts of money by enriching Fine Gael voting landlords with happen through these other things. And so when you look at... But just one point, Claire.
Really quickly, because I want to put all that to
but
Paddy
the Land
here.
Development Agency, which was launched this week, is actually so indicative of this. There was a great chance... You know, Owen Murphy's on the brink of being kicked out of government. He had this
he's
great...
not, but...
it's being put to a vote. But he has this chance to really seize the initiative and do something. And yes, the Land Development Agency is a chance to do that. But he didn't make it 100% affordable housing. It's 30% and 10% social housing. And that's not good enough because he's obsessed with private profit.
All right. Are you concerned about that? About that in a nutshell, that Fine Gael is concerned about private profit, that you're about protecting landlords, and the 37% of people who support what Take Back the City are doing. Are you worried about that?
Well, with all due respect to Ms. Bunty, the issue, I mean, she makes a point that we're somehow in cahoots with landholders in order to some sort of evil conspiracy to make sure that everybody who's involved in property makes money. Why would we do that? That would be incredibly unpopular. It would elongate a housing crisis that is clearly a millstone around
That's
this.
exactly what's happening. It's unpopular and it's elongating the housing crisis.
If Fine Gael was so, we keep on hearing about the ideological block that Fine Gael have against building building social. Why would Fine Gael why would the government then have built so many social houses in the last year?
They didn't. That's the problem. They didn't.
There's 2,200 social houses built in the last year. Were they not built?
All right.
When you're giving out
Were they
housing,
not built?
Any new
Last
house
word, Carl.
will be subject to local property tax, which can be used. And the whole thing is, if your plan is to basically steal from people to get your agenda, you're going to have to go back to the drawing board. It's the same as you can't solve poverty by taking money out of someone else's pocket by force.
All right. Listen, we got to leave it there, but thank you all very much indeed for coming in. Aisling from
Yeah,
Take
I
Back
was
the City.
just
Thank you
gonna
very
say,
much. No, we've got to leave it
can
there.
we
We're
all
out
more
of time.
comments?
We're out of time. We're out of
Thank
time. We'll
you.
have you back. Thanks very much. Thank you. Okay. Our studio audience are always very special every night, but tonight they truly are extraordinary because there's a group of people sitting just over here whose lives have all been touched by organ donation, and I want to come and have a chat with them.